The standard explanation is simple. In the 19th century, Western nations reformed their penal systems. They moved away from public punishment and transportation to colonies. They built modern prisons to house criminals humanely and rehabilitate offenders. The construction boom reflected progressive thinking and growing populations. But in 1829, the Eastern State Penitentiary opened in Philadelphia with 450 cells. The city's annual conviction rate at the time averaged 83 inmates per year. In London, Pentonville Prison was completed in 1842 with capacity for 520 prisoners. The facility was designed as a model institution, intended to serve the entire metropolitan area. But London's criminal conviction rate in 1842 resulted in fewer than 300 long-term incarcerations annually. The prison operated at partial capacity for decades. In Pittsburgh, the Western State Penitentiary was rebuilt in 1882 with infrastructure to hold 1,200 inmates. The state's total prison population at the time was 890. The facility included cell blocks, workshops, administrative offices, and a hospital wing scaled for numbers that wouldn't materialize until well into the 20th century. These weren't gradual expansions. They were designed from the ground up for populations that didn't exist. The infrastructure was built before the demand. And the pattern repeated across dozens of facilities in the United States and Britain within the same narrow window of time. Before continuing, this is not a video claiming conspiracy or suppressed history. This is an examination of construction records, sentencing data, and architectural design that remains difficult to align with the official narrative. Everything discussed here is based on public records and observable infrastructure. The purpose is to present the patterns and allow you to examine them. The conventional reasoning is that reformers wanted to avoid overcrowding. They'd seen the horrors of older facilities and wanted modern prisons ready before they were needed. In some cases, that logic makes sense. Crime rates were expected to rise with urbanization and industrialization. Building ahead of demand was prudent planning. But the scale doesn't match the projections. Take the Auburn Prison in New York. Opened in 1817, it was expanded in 1825 to hold 550 inmates. New York's total state prison population in 1825 was approximately 380. The expansion included 5-story cell blocks, a chapel, a dining hall, and a workshop complex designed for industrial-scale labor programs. The facility wasn't filled to capacity until the 1860s, nearly 40 years after construction. The design wasn't temporary or modular. It was permanent infrastructure built with stone, iron, and advanced engineering. The cell blocks included individual heating systems, ventilation shafts, and plumbing that required significant technical expertise. This wasn't anticipatory construction. It was construction based on certainty. The same pattern appears across the Atlantic. In Britain, the separate system prisons built during the 1840s and 1850s followed nearly identical designs. Pentonville became the template. Within 20 years, at least 15 prisons across England, Scotland, and Wales replicated its architecture almost exactly. These facilities included radial cell block designs, central observation towers, and underground passageways connecting different sections of the prison. The engineering was complex. The construction costs were enormous. And in nearly every case, the prisons operated below capacity for decades after opening. The timing raises questions that standard histories don't fully address. Between 1820 and 1860, the United States built more than 30 major penitentiaries. Britain constructed or rebuilt more than 20. The facilities appeared within a 40-year window, across multiple regions, following design principles that required coordination no one has adequately explained. The architecture itself is striking. High stone walls, Gothic or neoclassical facades, symmetrical layouts, centralized administration buildings, watchtowers positioned at precise intervals. The prisons looked like fortresses, built to last centuries, designed as if they expected something beyond ordinary criminal justice. Consider the scale of investment. In 1850, the construction of Millbank Prison in London consumed nearly £500,000, an extraordinary sum for the period. The facility was designed to hold 1,200 prisoners. London's conviction rate at the time produced fewer than 400 long-term sentences annually. The prison operated at one-third capacity for most of its early decades. These weren't mistakes. City councils, state legislatures, and national governments approved the funding. Banks secured the loans. Architects designed the structures. Engineers supervised the construction. Every step required justification, oversight, and approval from institutions that demanded fiscal responsibility. Yet they built facilities 3 times larger than the populations they served. And then there's the question of labor. Many of these prisons included workshops, factories, and agricultural complexes designed for industrial-scale production. The Eastern State Penitentiary had shoemaking workshops, weaving operations, and carpentry facilities capable of employing hundreds of inmates simultaneously. At the time it opened, the facility held fewer than 100 prisoners. The infrastructure wasn't added later. It was part of the original design. The workshops included machinery, power systems, and storage facilities that assumed full operational capacity from the start. Whoever designed these prisons expected them to function at scale immediately. The pattern becomes harder to dismiss when you examine how uniform the systems were. Prison administration, record-keeping methods, sentencing structures, parole systems, solitary confinement protocols. These practices appeared almost simultaneously across institutions that had limited means of communication. There was no centralized prison authority in the United States during this period. Yet the systems implemented in Pennsylvania looked nearly identical to those in New York, Ohio, and Illinois. Britain had more centralized oversight, but even there, the speed of implementation is notable. The Prison Act of 1839 reformed the system, and within 15 years, nearly every major city had a new facility following the same architectural and administrative template. If these systems developed independently, the uniformity is difficult to explain. If they were coordinated, the mechanisms of that coordination remain unclear in the historical record. What remains undeniable is that the infrastructure appeared before the need for it was evident. The infrastructure extended beyond the prison walls. In 1835, Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary was connected to the city's water system through dedicated underground pipes. The plumbing network was designed to serve a facility operating at full capacity. But the prison housed fewer than 200 inmates. The water infrastructure remained underutilized for decades. The same pattern appeared in transportation. Prisons built during this period often included rail sidings, loading docks, and access roads engineered for industrial-scale logistics. Sing Sing Prison in New York, rebuilt in 1828, had a dedicated waterfront dock on the Hudson River and road systems designed to handle heavy freight traffic. The facility's actual operational needs didn't require that level of infrastructure until the 1870s. These weren't add-ons. They were part of the original construction plans. In Britain, Dartmoor Prison was built in 1809 to hold French prisoners of war. After the war ended, it was converted to a civilian penitentiary in 1850. But the conversion included massive expansions. The facility was redesigned to hold 1,500 inmates. Devon's conviction rate at the time produced fewer than 300 long-term prisoners annually across the entire county. The expansion included new cell blocks, administrative buildings, a hospital wing, and a chapel. The construction costs nearly bankrupted the local government. Yet the project was approved and completed. The financial pressure was enormous. But the buildings went up anyway. Across the Atlantic, similar decisions were being made. In 1850, Illinois opened the Joliet prison with capacity for 1,200 inmates. The state's total prison population was 437. The facility included limestone quarries, workshops, and a rail connection designed for commercial-scale production. The infrastructure assumed full utilization from day one. The quarries are particularly notable. They weren't small operations. They were industrial excavation sites with machinery, rail systems, and processing facilities. The prison was designed to function as a manufacturing complex, not just a detention center. And this wasn't unique to Joliet. Prisons across the United States and Britain during this period included industrial infrastructure that exceeded their immediate needs. Textile mills, metalworking shops, brick kilns, agricultural operations. The facilities were designed as economic engines, scaled for labor forces that didn't exist yet. The administrative systems inside these prisons followed the same pattern. Record-keeping protocols, classification systems, intake procedures, sentencing calculations. These systems appeared fully formed, as if they'd been designed for institutions already operating at capacity. In 1842, Pentonville Prison in London implemented a classification system that divided inmates by offense type, sentence length, and behavioral assessment. The system required dozens of administrative staff to operate. At the time, the prison employed fewer than 20 guards and clerks. The classification system wasn't fully functional until the 1860s. The same thing happened in Pennsylvania. Eastern states' administrative offices included filing systems, record vaults, and clerical workspaces designed for a staff of 50. The facility employed 12 administrators when it opened. The systems were in place, but the people to operate them hadn't arrived yet. Whether this reflects inheritance or convergence, the coordination required is significant. Prison architects in Philadelphia would have needed to communicate with counterparts in London. Engineers designing water systems in New York would have needed to reference similar projects in Manchester. Administrative reformers in different states would have needed to share detailed operational protocols. Some of that communication happened. Prison reform societies existed. Architects traveled. Reports were published. But the speed and uniformity of implementation suggest something more than gradual knowledge transfer. The infrastructure appeared as if it was following a template that already existed. In the 1850s, Ohio built 3 new state prisons within a 7-year span. The facilities were located in different regions, designed by different architects, and funded through different legislative processes. Yet the buildings shared nearly identical floor plans, cell dimensions, and administrative layouts. The same pattern appears in Britain. Between 1842 and 1858, 12 prisons were built or rebuilt following the Pentonville model. The architectural similarity is so precise that historians have assumed direct copying. But the construction timelines overlap in ways that make sequential copying unlikely. The facilities were being designed simultaneously, suggesting they were all referencing the same source material. That source material has never been conclusively identified. And then there's the question of who built them. Prison construction in the 19th century required advanced engineering, stone cutting, iron casting, plumbing systems, ventilation networks, electrical wiring in later facilities. The labor wasn't unskilled. It required masons, metal workers, engineers, and architects with specialized knowledge. In many cases, prison construction crews moved from one project to the next. The same firms that built Eastern State worked on Sing Sing. The engineers who designed Pentonville consulted on facilities across Britain. There was a network of specialized labor that moved between projects, carrying knowledge and techniques with them. But the timeline suggests that network was already established when the construction boom began. The first prisons of the 1820s were built with the same level of expertise as those constructed in the 1850s. There's no learning curve in the records. The infrastructure appears fully developed from the start. The pattern compounds when you consider the timing of legal reforms. In the United States, penal codes were standardized across states during the 1830s and 1840s. Sentencing guidelines, classification of offenses, parole systems. These reforms happened at the state level with limited federal coordination. Yet the legal frameworks implemented in Massachusetts closely resembled those in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. The same thing occurred in Britain. The Prisons Act of 1839 and subsequent reforms created a uniform penal system across England and Wales. But the speed of implementation suggests the legal infrastructure was already prepared before the legislation passed. The prisons were built for a system that was about to be implemented, or for a system that had existed before. The term Tartaria first appeared on European maps in the 13th century. It was a geographic label used to describe the vast territories across Central Asia and parts of Eastern Europe. The name came from the Mongol and Turkic peoples who inhabited the region, though European cartographers used it loosely to refer to areas they didn't fully understand. By the 18th century, the term had largely fallen out of use in official geography. The Russian Empire expanded eastward, and more precise names replaced the old designation. Tartaria disappeared from maps not because it was erased, but because it was no longer needed. In recent years, the term has been reinterpreted. Online researchers began using Tartaria not as a geographic region, but as a label for an architectural and infrastructural pattern they couldn't easily explain. The term became shorthand for a specific observation, that buildings and systems from the 19th century often appear more advanced, more coordinated, and more permanent than the official timeline suggests. This reinterpretation doesn't claim Tartaria was a lost empire. It doesn't argue for suppressed history or hidden civilizations. Instead, it uses the term as a conceptual framework to describe infrastructure that feels out of sync with its documented context. The prisons are part of that framework. When people refer to Tartaria's detention facilities, they're not claiming these buildings were constructed by a forgotten society. They're pointing to a pattern: penal systems that appeared suddenly, facilities that were over-engineered, and administrative frameworks that seemed to exist before the populations they were designed to control. There are three ways to interpret this pattern. The first interpretation is conventional. Reformers were ambitious. They wanted to modernize criminal justice. They built large facilities because they anticipated future growth and wanted to avoid the mistakes of older, overcrowded prisons. Some predictions proved accurate. Others didn't. But the intent was forward-thinking, not anomalous. This explanation works for certain cases. Cities that experienced rapid industrial growth did eventually fill their prisons. Infrastructure built ahead of demand proved justified over time. But it doesn't account for the facilities that remained underutilized for decades, or the uniformity of design across regions with vastly different crime rates and legal systems. The second interpretation is that these facilities were part of a coordinated reform movement. Whether through prison societies, architectural firms, or government programs, institutions followed a shared template. The uniformity wasn't accidental. It was systematic, driven by reformers who believed in standardized approaches to incarceration and rehabilitation. This explanation accounts for the architectural consistency and the simultaneous appearance of similar administrative systems. Prison reform movements existed. Architects shared designs. Governments consulted with one another. But it requires a level of coordination that isn't fully documented in the historical record. No central authority mandated these designs across multiple countries and dozens of independent jurisdictions. The third interpretation is that the infrastructure was adapted from earlier systems. That some of the prisons, some of the administrative frameworks, some of the legal codes were inherited from a previous period of institutional development that hasn't been fully integrated into the standard historical narrative. This doesn't mean a lost civilization. It means that the 19th century may have been a period of reconstruction or repurposing, rather than pure creation. The prisons were designed using knowledge that already existed. The systems were implemented based on frameworks that had been used before. Whether that knowledge came from earlier European penal colonies, from military detention systems, or from something else remains unclear. All three interpretations can coexist. Some prisons were built optimistically. Some followed coordinated reform models. Some may have adapted earlier institutional infrastructure. The answer likely varies by location and context. But the pattern itself is consistent. In 1816, something changed. That year is remembered for the year without a summer, caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora. Crops failed. Temperatures dropped. Economic disruption spread across Europe and North America. But 1816 also marks the beginning of a period when institutional infrastructure accelerated in ways that remain difficult to fully explain. Within 30 years, nations across the Western world had built prisons, courthouses, administrative offices, and legal systems that wouldn't be fully utilized for decades. The construction happened during a period of economic instability, yet the financial resources were found. The engineering expertise was available. The institutional frameworks were implemented. The timing is notable because it followed a period of disruption. Whether that disruption reset systems or revealed the need for new ones, the infrastructure that emerged afterward was built at a scale that exceeded immediate demand. The metaphor of Tartaria isn't about proving an alternative history. It's about recognizing that the infrastructure we've inherited doesn't always align with the story we've been told about how it was created. The prisons are still there. The records are accessible. The facilities can be measured. The conviction data can be compared. And when you do, the pattern remains. Whether this reflects optimism, coordination, or inheritance is a question the evidence invites but doesn't conclusively answer. What remains clear is that the penal infrastructure of the 19th century was designed for populations that didn't exist yet. The facilities were constructed with precision and permanence. The systems were implemented with uniformity. And the scale was consistent across regions that had limited means of communication. The story we've been told is that reformers built for the future. But the evidence suggests they may have been building for something they already knew was coming, or preparing for something that had been there before.